customs and traditions which don't work favorably towards women. But the reality is Africa and many African communities defined the roles of women in a very clear way, in a complementary way. When we talk about that not happening today, we are doing so because of the manner in which we have misunderstood how we should operate in a so-called westernized way of doing things. But Africa is the land of men and women. First of all, remember we are speaking in English. If you are speaking in Zulu, or in Ovambo, or in Ovimbundu, or Tiv, or Igbo, or Yoruba, or Kikuyu, or Luo, would you have a word like feminism? No. The whole idea about women being mistreated and therefore a movement of women whose agenda is to fight men, because feminism as understood in the modern world is almost as if there is a war or a battle between men and women. And that I think is wrong. I believe that in areas where men have not conducted themselves well in their relationship with women, positive steps, deliberate steps should be taken to ensure that men involve women, or that women are involved rather than men involving women, because that also assumes that men have something that they are giving out of their goodwill or charity. So I do not support any movement which characterizes the relationship of men and women as if it was a war to be won by one side. So if there is that war, then when you win, what do you do? This is the question that must be posed. So it is not true that there is such a war, and feminists must be told that what we are doing is to ensure that our women are given their pride of place so that they continue to play their role in an effective manner. Yes. What a man can do, a woman can do. And what are we calling on women to do in this day and age? We are calling women and want women to be involved in decision making. Therefore, I want to see women being present in the political space. I want to see men, or rather women, being involved in the legal space. In fact, in Kenya today and many African countries, there are more women in the legal profession and in the medical profession than there are men. I want to see women in engineering. I want to see women in ICT, and there are very many women in that space. So what we want to see is the full involvement of women in nation building. It is Nelson Mandela who said famously several years ago that a society cannot expect to realize her full potential if 52% of the population is not effectively involved. And we are not talking about tokenism. We are not talking about favors. We are not talking about affirmative action on creation of political offices for women only. We believe that if the society is properly ordered and the historical disadvantages that have stood in the face of women wanting to achieve are removed, then women are as good as men. And in certain areas, they are even better. So what we want is full involvement in the total life of the society. I'm one who seldom uses the word equality. I prefer to use the word equity, because equality is really a word that says that we are comparing like with like. No, there are certain things that only women can do. Men can shout all they want, but they can't carry children in their belly for 9 months. They are incapable of doing that. They are biologically wired differently. There are certain things that only men can do. That is why we talk of complementarity. That is why if you want to be spiritual about it, God talks about a helper. And God talks about it in the Quran. God talks about it in the Hindu Gita. God talks about it in the Christian Bible. God talks about it in Christian tradition. It is complementarity. And once you are complementing each other, you don't use words such as equality. We are simply talking about we are human beings wired differently playing different roles and therefore helping each other to do what is desirable. What is power? You see, when we talk about power, we talk about political power. Right now, Africa is the youngest continent on earth. Youngest to mean that our population below the age of 40 is almost 80% in certain countries. And what young people need to do is to wake up and not to be used as cannon fodder by selfish politicians. You are talking about their role in the political arena. If today young people were to make a decision that we are going to elect good young people, they would do it. They cannot continue to be leaders of tomorrow. You are told you are a leader of tomorrow when you are 20, a leader of tomorrow when you are 40, a leader of tomorrow when you are 60, and you have this 80-year-olds who are telling you that you are a leader of tomorrow, and they themselves went into the leadership space when they were in their 20s. Africa's problem is a group of individuals right now, most of them in their 70s and 80s, who have refused to leave the stage. That is Africa's problem. And you see it across the continent of Africa. You see it in Cameroon, you see it in Zimbabwe, you see it in countries such as Kenya, where you have individuals who have been on stage since the year dot, and they still want to dominate, to rule the roost. It is the duty of the young people to rise. And history has taught us that when young people rise and take their positions in different sectors, then they achieve. Look at the struggle for independence in Africa. The people who are in the struggle for independence were in their 20s and their 30s. The people who are in the revolutions, whether you are talking about this, the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa or the Soweto massacre, all these were young people. It is the young people who must rise up and use the power of the vote to ensure that they are present in the leadership arena. But they must also remember that youth in and of itself is not a qualification to serve. There are many young people who are dangerous to Africa, and there are many old people who are dangerous to Africa, and equally there are good young people and good old people. So it must be a mix. Leadership must represent and must reflect the complexion of the society. And young people in Africa, in my view, are not playing their role. They prefer to be used in riots. They prefer to be used as ginger group. They prefer to be deployed as goons. They prefer to be used in a negative fashion. Yet if they organize themselves, then they could make demands of political leadership and be present in every arena for the benefit of this continent. If you look at what happened, for example, in what was called the Arab Spring, young people came up and they simply went in Tahrir Square and they said, we demand certain changes. That is one method where there is an awakening of the people. Political maturity rises in that way. But mentorship that you talk about is simply observing what others have done. If you look at South Africa, for example, you see how young people are involved in the political arena. If you look at the economic freedom fighters in South Africa, led by my good friend Julius Selo Malema, they are involved, and they started being involved in the youth cadre. If you go to Chama cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania, they have a youth cadre. If you go to Rwanda, they have a youth cadre. And their youth wings or cadres are not just people who are used to erect tents or to shout at political rallies. They are involved. And this is very critical. In other words, they need mentorship through clear party organs in places where there are proper political parties, and they can also be mentored through other avenues. And in that way, then they become leaders. If you go to Tanzania, for example, they'll tell you, I started serving as a cadre of Chama cha Mapinduzi, or I started serving as a cadre before the merger of Afro-Shirazi. If you go to South Africa, you'll find African National Congress say so. If you go to Mozambique, Frelimo says so. If you go to Angola, to Namibia, SWAPO says so. If you go to Angola, MPLA, they have party cadres. And this is what we need. In Kenya, of course, we don't, because parties keep on changing every other night. So there is nothing to be a cadre of. You are a cadre of party A today. The party A has become B, it has become D, it has become C, it has mutated. So it has no form. But the most important thing is that they must be organized. And it's the duty of us who are slightly older to use our position and our experience to mentor young people. The reason why we mentor young people is because we have lived a little longer, made a number of mistakes, and we are telling them, we made these mistakes. Don't make the mistakes that we made. We did certain things well. Improve on those things so that every generation becomes better and better because we are learning from experience. But if we don't learn from experience, then we keep on repeating the same mistakes, and Africa is the poorer because of it. Right now, because we must compare ourselves with others. You go to countries, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, see what is happening in Sweden. Look at the age of people there, 40 in their leadership. Finland, 30s, Denmark, Norway. And they are men and women, young men and women. You listen to them, you see them, they are charged, they are switched on, they are good. But you come to Africa, octogenarians who can barely walk, who can't stay awake for 10 minutes are the ones who are telling us about the future. They have one leg in the grave and one leg outside, and they don't want to leave the stage. They want to be pushed off the stage. Surely, how can a continent and a people be dragged down by such selfish individuals? The youth must move them out. In the Kiswahili word that Nyerere invented was kung'atuka, to leave office with dignity. In my view, mentorship is critical. My foundation was founded 30 years ago, on 16th of December, 1990, when I was earning 5,000 Kenya shillings at a law firm called Waruhi and Mwite here in Nairobi. And I made that decision to form a foundation when I met a lady who was a New Zealander and was paying school fees for a young man at Starehe Boys Center. And I asked her, you must be very rich to be paying money for somebody in Africa. She says, no. I am earning the equivalent then of 30,000 Kenya shillings, but I sacrificed that another person should know better. And I said, if somebody can come from New Zealand and educate somebody in Nairobi, Kenya, why can't I? Why can't I ensure that 10% of my income goes into things? And the foundation has now grown with a footprint in 50 countries in Africa, some form of representation. And I can give testimony, and young people can give testimony across the continent. Do I give them money? No, I don't. What do I share with them? I don't give them. I share with them ideas. I affirm them where they are, whether they are in Tanzania, whether they are in Mozambique, whether they are in the Gambia, whether they are in Senegal or Guinea-Bissau or Sudan or Ethiopia. I affirm them. Some are great farmers now. Some are great orators. Some are great authors. Some are great in IT. Some are great lawyers. And I'm happy because that is the only way in which you clone yourself, if you may. And if many of us do this, then you can imagine the young men and women that we can produce. And there are people who are doing this. I know Tony Elumelu in Nigeria is doing great work in this regard. James Mwangi here in Kenya through his bank Equity, Dr. Murioki through Cooperative Bank, doing great things. And many other people that I know that are doing great things in the continent of Africa. And this is what we must do. Create an army of young men and women who are charged, who want to do the right thing, whose motivation is to change Africa village by village. That is what our mentorship program is all about. And that is what we are urging the world. Because for how long shall we depend on others to help us? We must lift ourselves up by our bootstraps. And we can, and we must. The future led by good Africans, because youth is also not a permanent state. You are youth today, a few years you are not young anymore. A future that is led by Africans who love Africa, who start leading Africa when they are their very best, when they are young, and then they grow into leadership and mature and then leave. That Africa can only be good if we have young people and young women who are ethical. That is why we must morally rearm ourselves. You know, When I look at the people who were in Africa in the 1960s, and I can think about them in the 1970s, they were young, they were idealistic. When I'm thinking about people like Solomon Mahlangu in South Africa, Bantu Stephen Biko, the young women Albertina Sisulu, I'm talking of people like Grasa Machel, I'm looking at Samora Moises Machel. Here in Kenya, there were younger people also involved. Even if you look at people like Thomas Joseph Mboya, they were young. Gikonyo Kiano, they were young. People like in the little earlier, Didan Kimathi Washiuri, they were young. You go to Tanzania, you look at people like Rashid Kawawa, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Dr. Cleroux, who was a great trade unionist, Apollo Milton Obote before he was overthrown. And we've seen younger people, Meles Zenawi, a younger Yoweri Museveni, a younger Paul Kagame, young people, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Emery Lumumba, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and Modibo Keita, Ahmed Ben Bella, Leopold Sedar Senghor. There are many people. And these were young people. Winnie Madikizela Mandela, if you talk about women. Johnson Sirleaf, if you talk about women. They were there, Sheikh Amani Karume. And these were young people. And those who knew then left. Thomas Sankara, they came, they were young, they delivered, left. So what we are saying is youth in itself is not a qualification. You can't say, I'm young, therefore I'm fit to lead. I'm a woman, therefore I'm fit to lead. What kind of young man are you? What kind of woman are you? Do you love Africa? Can you serve Africa? Do you want to be served, or you want to serve the continent of Africa? That is what we are talking about. And what we must do, therefore, in Africa is to morally rearm our young men and women and equip them with the tools which will make them recognize that leadership is about service, not about acquisition of material wealth and enjoying the trappings of power, motorcades, guards, allowances. That is not leadership, that is greed. When I see these exodus, there was a time when Europe and America needed young Africans. They took them there. They took them as slaves to work in the farms in the Caribbean and in Europe and in the Americas. They took them for free. They humiliated them. There was a mass exodus. It's estimated that more than 50% of African population was taken out of the continent, that to build agrarian Europe. Today, there is a modern day slavery where we are training our young men and women. We are training them as nurses. Europe does not need people to work in the farms now. The new farms are hospitals. The new farms are ITs and companies and those. Now, we give them